right. Well, I'm seeing a good amount of people in the room now, and usually I take a few minutes for an introduction here, so I'll just start babbling. And we're really grateful to have Melissa Lavasani here today with us. She's going to be talking about inclusive psychedelic advocacy will ensure equitable public policy. Before I talk more about her, I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm Sean McAllister. I'm the General Counsel of Chacruna and also an attorney working in Colorado and California and other places around the country. Melissa and I have a lot in common because we're both policy reform advocates. I'm a part of the Denver psilocybin policy review panel and the campaign that decriminalized psilocybin in Denver. I have worked on California decriminalization on the 2020 psilocybin decrim initiative that almost made the ballot but didn't get on the ballot. And now I've been working on the California Senator Wiener bill that would decriminalize all psychedelics other than peyote. In California, I've worked on the Decrim Seattle initiative. So I just wanted to say Melissa and I share a similar passion and love for policy. And I'm excited to hear her talk today. In particular, she's going to, well, a little bit of background on Melissa. She is the founder and executive director of the Plant Medicine Coalition, a Washington, D.C. based organization advocating for all plant medicines and their synthetic derivatives at the national, state, and local levels. Prior to that, Melissa was the key proponent of D.C.'s Initiative 81, the Entheogenic Plant and Fungus Policy Act of 2020, which was a historic ballot initiative that passed by, I think, 76%, a historic endorsement of decriminalization of entheogens in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. And she comes to the issue with some personal experience, including having entheogenic plant and fungi help her overcome severe postpartum depression. She was born to Iranian immigrants in Washington and lives in Washington, D.C., and I think it gives her a wonderful, unique perspective to talk about this topic today. She encountered challenges and opposition in her Initiative 81 work that included issues around inclusion and diversity, and she's going to be sharing some of the wisdom she learned through that campaign and in her work with the Plant Medicine Coalition, which she hopes will lead to an open and honest dialogue about mental health, psychedelic research, and cultural relevance of sacred plants and sacraments. And I think she'll be talking specifically about the Plant Medicine Coalition, which envisions a world where all members of the psychedelic movement have a seat at the table and a voice with their government. So with that said, I will get out of the way. A couple of housekeeping measures here. Please put your questions in the Q&A chat, which is up in the dialog box there to the right of the regular chat. So if you have questions, drop those in the Q&A. I believe we have 50 minutes for this panel, and so we'll save the last 15 or 20 minutes for questions. So without further ado, Melissa Lavasani, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, so it's important for everyone to understand where I'm coming from and what my background is, because that's really been my guiding post to the work I am planning to do from here on out with psychedelics and plant medicine. You know, I am a relative newcomer to the psychedelic movement, as you know, I had never, prior to 2018, I had never even tried a psychedelic before. So, you know, it was the 2017, I was truly living the life I dreamed I would have lived as a child. You know, I had a really amazing, supportive husband. I had one daughter, Lola, and I was pregnant with my second child, Ramsey, in 2017. And that's when I developed sciatica, which, you know, is chronic pain from that's originated in your pelvis down to your legs. So I was dealing with pain day in, day out. And, you know, I eventually developed what they call antepartum depression. It's a depression that very few people actually talk about. It's never, our practitioners don't ever warn us of this. You know, I think whatever focuses on mental health during pregnancy is usually what we experience after pregnancy. So I was kind of, swimming in this darkness, in a really supposedly happy time of my life, when, I was just feeling terrible about myself. I was very quickly prescribed antidepressants. And, I was very reticent to go down the antidepressant road. I was assured that it was safe for me and my child, but, there were no guarantees. There was no research backing that. And I didn't really quite trust it, to be honest, because I had lost a friend to suicide who was on antidepressants. And it was a very jarring experience for me, because I saw him struggle, and I saw a few of my other friends struggle with pharmaceutical antidepressants, and it just seemed like not a road I wanted to go down at that point in my life. I had enough on my plate. I had, my growing family and my career, that I was, trying to maintain balance with everything. So I gave birth to a healthy baby boy, and, shortly after that, my depression spiraled out of control. I was dealing with really crippling anxiety. I was isolating myself. I had delusions, and I had suicidal ideation. I would sit at work and fantasize about how I could take my own life, because I was so desperate and miserable to get out of this situation, and nothing else was working. Talk therapy wasn't working. All the other alternative methods I was using weren't working. So I had stumbled upon psilocybin as a treatment for mental health through a podcast. I was listening to Paul Stamets brilliantly go on about the benefits of psilocybin. And at that point in my life, I was just really desperate for a solution. And, I decided that I would break the law to try this out. So my husband and I grew psilocybin mushrooms in our closet, in our bedroom, and we got really lucky with our first try, and we had enough mushrooms for me to start microdosing for about probably 2 to 3 months. And after a couple days, I was feeling amazing, and I started feeling like myself again. I was engaging with my children once again. I was connecting with my husband, and I wanted to connect with my friends once more. And, I thought this was really profound, and I started to dig into this and realize that, there is this whole movement that has been happening recently. And, I dug into the history of the war on drugs, and I realized that what was under the guise of keeping our citizens safe in this country was really just a political ploy to oppress certain people in this country. So, I felt very moved by this in my experience in my life. But I did run out of psilocybin mushrooms, and I almost serendipitously got introduced to ayahuasca through a friend of mine. And after a few experiences with ayahuasca, I felt like I needed to initiate a change in my community. I realized that I experienced immense healing with these medicines, and a lot of other people don't have that opportunity because they fear that they are breaking the law, or they feel they are already targets for law enforcement and don't want to risk it. So, if it was such a struggle for me as the average person, who had a lot of safety nets. I had a supportive husband. I had a supportive job. I had plenty of leave that I could use. I had a great manager who was also a young mother and was really sympathetic towards my issues, and was very generous with me and covered for me at my job a lot. But I realized that a lot of other people don't have that, and I really felt motivated to do something. I was so profoundly moved by my healing that I proposed Initiative 81, the Entheogenic Plant and Fungus Policy Act of 2020, and I became the chairwoman of Decriminalize Nature DC. I was named the most normal person ever to advocate for psychedelics by the Washingtonian magazine, and I led a campaign in the most impossible of circumstances, during a pandemic, to discuss an extremely controversial subject to many people, and that is psychedelics. As Sean said, Decriminalize Nature DC did make history by getting 76% of voters to vote yes, the most margin any ballot initiative in DC has ever won by. And we're super proud of that. I think we overcame a lot in our campaign, and we really we really changed the dialogue of how people were talking about plant medicines. You know, I think prior to that, to our campaign, there was a lot of discussion about, you know, the freedom to explore our minds, and, you know, it really, a lot of personal human stories weren't connected to plant medicine, and our campaign really took a chance. And, you know, I really took a chance personally by sharing my story with so many people and really exposing my family. But what I learned was, you know, that a lot of people are struggling, and the pandemic reinforced that. And I think that my story was almost a story of hope for so many people that were struggling with mental illness. And, you know, our campaign did an amazing job of bringing people into this movement who normally would have been really intimidated or wouldn't have understood this movement. We really humanized it in a way that people can understand it. And we were really proud of that work. And I think DC will forever be different because of Initiative 81. And, you know, I think the Plant Medicine Coalition is kind of the embodiment of that. So throughout the campaign, my friend and fellow campaign steering committee member Molly Allen and I began to recognize that there was essentially zero lobbying and education happening regarding psychedelics at the federal level. There was a lot of focus on breakthrough therapies at the FDA, which is incredibly important, but discussions were not being had with our actual lawmakers, senators, and representatives. So in order to properly shape the narrative of psychedelics and really educate lawmakers on the benefits of plant medicines, Molly and I founded Plant Medicine Coalition. We are the first and only national psychedelic lobbying and advocacy organization. Molly is a partner at the lobbying firm American Continental Group, where she leads their healthcare practice. She also worked in both the House and the Senate. In the Senate, she worked for Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and for 5 years. So needless to say, we were leaning really heavily on her federal policy expertise and relationships and all of our networks in DC. We are gathering coalition members as we speak, but right now we're comprised of industry leaders, research institutions, mental health organizations, and Indigenous and veterans organizations. And we're trying something a little different than what has previously been explored in the psychedelic movement. We're really taking a big tent approach to psychedelic policy, and we welcome any and all policy conversations regarding plant medicines. We believe that this big tent approach is really critical to protecting the spiritual rights and aspects of plant medicines. This is not a one road track as far as policy goes. This psychedelics and plant medicine, touch very many policy areas, and we want to be sure that everyone is at the table when having these discussions with our lawmakers. Our country has had a long history of taking advantage of Indigenous peoples, and whether it's from stealing their goods or appropriating, or even worse, destroying Native culture. I believe that, without a concerted and coordinated effort from everybody in the psychedelic community, that it has its potential to be detrimental if we all just continue to work in our singular silos. We want to make sure that the broader movement of decrim and rescheduling and legalization is there, but we want to also be sure that we're including protecting Indigenous people and rights, and their ability to access plant medicine is just as important as, say, the research and decriminalization aspect of all of this. If we don't have larger businesses in the same room with us, and with Indigenous groups and with other veterans organizations and other people that are stakeholders in this movement, coming to a common consensus on how to best create sustainable, fair models of treatment and therapy, then I really worry about the future access of plant medicines. There are plant medicines currently that have been compromised and are endangered, and we need to ensure that these natural plant medicines are really considered and preserved for the Indigenous peoples that, without them, we wouldn't even be practicing with any of these medicines. So Plant Medicine Coalition wants to really work hand in hand with Chacruna and other Indigenous groups and churches to develop policy that specifically lifts up the expertise of Native people and creates a fair, equitable economic structure where those same peoples are equal partners in whatever wealth may come from these policies. You know, I don't think profit is always a bad thing. I think that for-profit can work for the good, but you know, we all need to be at the table and to have a voice there to ensure that the system that we create does not become unbalanced and lean heavily on the profit side. We don't expect these conversations to be easy by any means, but they are necessary for these kind of issues to be considered as a major policy platform for the psychedelic movement. In our initial conversations with members of Congress over these last 4 months that the Plant Medicine Coalition has been launched, we've realized there's even more of a lack of knowledge about these substances, how they affect our brain and mental health than we assumed, and even less knowledge about the long cultural history of some of these plant medicines. You know, our lawmakers know little to nothing about groundbreaking research that is being done around the globe to show the promising effects of medications like PTSD, depression, anxiety, and addiction. So we really have our work cut out for us. You know, when considering what approach to take with the federal government, we initially thought that research is a great first step for our federal lawmakers. So we are currently working towards federal research grants housed at NIH for research institutions, colleges, and universities. We're also working with members on the introduction of a bill to do the same and a fall briefing for members of Congress and staff. This is going to be a very long road for psychedelic reform at a federal level. We see how long cannabis has taken to really take hold on the congressional level. And, you know, we're just now, you know, decades into the cannabis movement, and, you know, there's still major issues that are being sorted out at a federal level. And, you know, we want to be sure that psychedelic policy kind of doesn't follow that. You know, we want to engage with our federal government really early on, and we want to have a coordinated, we want to have continued coordinated conversations with them. So the system is set up from the very beginning to be as equitable and representative as possible. So Plant Medicine Coalition is really in it for the long haul. I have found that, you know, the psychedelics world, we all exist in our little bubble and we're all talking to each other. And we have ignored the big elephant in the room, and that is the federal government. So that's why this early engagement is just really important. What is happening with states and localities is so incredibly exciting. Like I said, I'm so proud of the work that Washington, DC accomplished, but it is all for naught if we don't begin to make inroads for a federal legal pathway for psychedelics and protections for these medicines. And every step of that path must be informed with knowledge and expertise of groups like Chacruna, like a lot of the indigenous groups and representatives of the movement that are presenting at this beautiful conference. Like I said, this is going to be really hard, but given my story and background, trust that I am fully committed to educating federal lawmakers and the Biden-Harris administration on how psychedelics have to be a part of our mental health and trauma conversations in this country. You know, we want to be sure that we're never really, these kind of issues are never really left out of our government. You know, I think that when we're having conversations about policy and the path forward, there's a lot of focus on, you know, the biotech sector and the research that's happening. But, you know, I think that equitable policy needs to start from the very beginning. And it needs to be on a platform that is just as important as drug development and decriminalization. You know, there's not one singular path towards a good psychedelic policy platform. You know, we need to have conversations about all of these issues starting now. So, you know, we really look forward to further engagement with various communities in the psychedelic movement. And, you know, we believe that this is key to the work that we're doing. That's why we decided to become a coalition, because, you know, we don't claim to be the experts here in Washington, D.C. You know, we are just the bridge connecting the experts to our lawmakers, to inform our lawmakers, because truly, the more knowledge they have about this, the better they can craft the policy, and the better groups can engage with our lawmakers to help them craft that policy. So that's really the key role that we plan on taking here for the future of psychedelic policy in DC. And I believe now we're going to have some time for questions.
Okay, Melissa, great job. Yeah, we do. We have plenty of time here, about 37, 38 minutes. Or I'm sorry, 27, 28 minutes.
I was like, oh, Lord, I talked too fast.
No, that's all right. You're right. You're basically right on time. And we do have several questions in the chat, and then I have several as well. But I'll ask most of these questions, just take them in order they were asked. Lisa asks, what messaging in the movement? What messaging do you think we need more of?
I think absolutely we need more storytelling. DC really proved that the storytelling element of psychedelics is really key to getting people to relate. I think that a lot of times in drug reform, there is kind of a wall between our lawmakers and our activists. And with the DC campaign, I proved, I'm a local government employee. I'm a budget officer of our local environmental agency here in DC. I'm a normal average person. Before this, I was not an activist. I was here in local DC, but I think that the more human you can make this issue, the better. Because the first thing that politicians ask us is, why should I care about this? Do my constituents care about this? So, for us, that's why, we have our federal arm of what we're doing with Plant Medicine Coalition, but we also have our state and local arm where, we want to help boost up state and local movements as much as possible. Because when we're having conversations with our federal lawmakers, they ask, why should I care about this? And then we can point to, well, you have so-and-so research institution in your jurisdiction, and they're conducting all of this research, or you have, your jurisdiction decriminalized psychedelics, and this was the margin that went by. These were the stakeholders in the movement. So really, this movement goes hand in hand, and a lot of the storytelling elements are what really kind of softens the heart of these lawmakers. That's why this the veteran stories are so important to a lot of movements. And you see in this Texas research bill that is getting passed, or is going through the channels right now, hopefully getting passed, they pointed a lot to the veterans community has serious issues with mental health, and then we're not being treated, and this has potential to treat it. It gives a face to this that almost allows lawmakers, it doesn't allow them to ignore it. So I think that's really key here.
All right, great answer. How about Nick's question? How can scientists and healthcare workers assist you in your advocacy?
Yeah, so there's going to be a point where, we're currently not taking person meetings on the Hill. I think that we're getting closer and closer there. Science and research is a really safe entry for our lawmakers right now. I think that we have to understand that we got to meet them where they are coming from, and their knowledge of this entire movement is pretty small. So, I think people find comfort in science still in this country. I hope that they do. So far with our lawmakers, being located in Washington, D.C., Johns Hopkins University is in the next city next to us in Baltimore. And we're, the moment you say, can I have a conversation with you about plant medicine, about psychedelics, you get the kind of reaction where it's like, okay, here we go. But then you say, there's really reputable organizations and research institutions looking at this subject matter and showing really promising results. So engaging with the science community is a real essential part of this. Hopefully we've got two things working right now. We're hoping for an appropriations in the budget for research funding. And we're also working on a bipartisan bill within the House that will hopefully get some traction this year. And I think that once one of these options gets passed for us, hopefully we will be working with Health and Human Services and NIH to really craft this research. And that's when the science and research community can really get engaged with this kind of work. We want to be sure that whatever research funding comes out of this, that the program is set up to, actually look at what the potential of these drugs, as opposed to, we would hate to have research funding out there that would look at the harms of some of these drugs. So, I think that's when that community can get really engaged in what we're doing, is to design the grant program that best serves the community and works well for them. Because this data is going to be the basis for further policies down the road with federal government. So it's really key that we get this right from the beginning.
Well, I'm glad you brought up actual bills in Congress. That was going to be one of my questions. I think most of us remember AO's bill that would have allowed some type of psychedelic or psilocybin research. So can you just give people an overview? You mentioned this research bill that's in Congress now. What's out there? Is there any real prospect of passage? How do you see the federal legislation? If the ideal bill isn't there right now, what should the ideal bill be? So a lot of questions there, but kind of where are we at now with federal policy, and where do you think we should go?
I think we're primed perfectly for something to happen this year. I mean, this is a big challenge as well, because, we have to remember that this country is in year 2 of a pandemic, and having conversations about this might seem kind of frivolous to some lawmakers. However, we know that later this year, after the really essential work is being done, like economic recovery and infrastructure bills, and also, a lot of the climate stuff's getting rolled out right now through the executive office. Once these few issues are checked off the list, and I think around this fall, there's going to be a lot of focus on mental health and the opioid crisis. So, I think these are two issues: opioid addiction crisis, and mental health in general are two issues that are kind of looming in the background of this country. And, the opioid epidemic is raging right now, worse than it's ever been. Mental health is really raging right now, worse than it's ever been. I cannot count how many friends right now that I have personally that are really struggling with mental health. Especially parents to little children are really stretched thin, and our lawmakers know that there's something that needs to happen in this policy area. So I think that we as a movement have an opportunity right now to really capitalize on their interest in this. And so, hopefully we will have either a bill or actual appropriations for, and our ask is for $100 million. It's probably a lot of money. We hope we get that. If we get less, that's fine. We think that any tiny movement forward is a good movement for psychedelics. This is a long haul. And so we're going to ask for $100 million in research funding for depression, PTSD, addiction, and anxiety. And we're including all kinds of psychedelics. And, you do that, you throw it the net as far as you cast it as wide as you can, and the lawmakers will chop it up as they see fit, but we will continuously engage with them, continuously bring stakeholders into meetings with them. And I think really this briefing, that opportunity that we have this fall to brief members and their staff, can be a really turning point for all of this. If we don't accomplish this year, then this fall briefing that we can set up is really going to hopefully turn this, accelerate this conversation to hopefully getting something for next year. But it's going to be a while. I think just setting up the research program might take a couple of years. But at the same time, states and localities will continue to decriminalize, and these lawmakers will see that. And I think that the momentum is there. We just have to make sure that we're doing it the right way here. And we really don't want to push lawmakers into something they're uncomfortable with. And I think this research funding is a really safe ask.
Okay, so just to be clear for everybody, is there a specific bill number, or is there anything that people could call the congressperson now, or we don't have that yet?
No, there's a draft of something right now that we're trying to get champions for it. So, and we want to make sure that this is really a bipartisan effort. If there is a change in administration, or if the House or the Senate flips, we want this to be something that both parties really understand. And so far, I think the bipartisan support at the state level is, it's there. We just want to be sure, and that's why probably AOC's bill failed, is because she is perceived as hard left by conservative side of politics in the United States. And, we want to find those champions that are right smack in the middle that, really don't alienate anybody, and, can reach across the aisle and build bridges that way as well.
Okay. Well, I like to just take some of the things you said and transition to related topics. So you said you want to build a big coalition for this legislation. I know you also want to build a big coalition for the Plant Medicine Coalition. And
yes,
some people, including Athena, have asked about Native American representation. I guess I just want to set the table with this and say that Initiative 81 was very similar to, and I think you said that all inspired by and helped supported by the Decriminalize Nature Oakland group, Carlos Plazola, and that organization has had some conflict with the Native American community over the peyote issue. So I really respect what you said about wanting to build a broad coalition, make sure everyone's voice is heard. And I guess, just give people a sense of what are you doing to broaden your coalition, to bring in all voices. If you can give any specific names of people that are part of your coalition or people you want to be part of it.
Yeah.
How are you trying to build an inclusive coalition?
Yeah, so I mean, one of our first coalition members was Chacruna, of course. I spoke to Bia about this idea months ago, and I think that it's really important that I included Chacruna as kind of like the hub for in indigenous rights in the plant medicine world. We're just starting now to build out our coalition, so our membership is really small right now. But I would hope that we could get some indigenous churches involved. We would love to hear, I know, Sean, you're working on a lot of issues with the RFRA and, how the government's been interacting with religious freedom and churches in this country. We've had some conversations about that as well. So, this is just the beginning, and having Chacruna as one of our founding coalition allies, we're going to take our coalition from there and make it as broad as possible and include anyone in the indigenous community that is really seeking to have a voice on the federal level. And we're open to all of those conversations. So as we build out our coalition, we really look forward to reaching out to those groups and getting them on board.
Yeah, great. I would promote Chacruna and say Chacruna also has the Sacred Plant Alliance, which is a coalition of plant medicine practitioners, a very diverse group that includes indigenous people, people of color, LGBTQ plus folks. And so there's other subparts of Chacruna. Certainly, I am working with the Church of the Eagle and the Condor on their work to get back their ayahuasca from the government. And I think you're right. I'd be happy to connect you to leadership there. And I think, lots of people would be interested in joining your coalition, because ultimately we do need some changes at the federal level.
Yeah.
So Let's see. I think, just continuing in this topic about sort of inclusion and social equity. I've been committed to social equity in cannabis where I do work, and of course have been thinking about it in the context of psychedelics. And as you said, a lot of these discussions are very difficult with competing interests, but have there been some themes or some issues that you've identified to help us understand what does social equity look like in psychedelics? Things that pop out to you that should be policy around social equity. Any comments on that would be welcome.
Yeah, so I think how we achieve social equity is more through our local activism. I mean, I think that topic is a bit far off for our federal lawmakers. We're just getting an introduction to them. So, when Initiative 81 passed here in DC, I knew that I wanted to create Plant Medicine Coalition, and I knew that I wanted PMC to kind of lead the charge for whatever was next for Initiative 81. But throughout the campaign, I know there is sensitivity about the psychedelics movement being too white. And knowing that DC was a really diverse city and had a really large Black population that is continuously underserved and marginalized, I knew that I didn't want our campaign just to win. I want it to be kind of the foundation for the plant medicine community in the city for the future. So engaging in communities that are normally left out of these conversations was really important to us. So as Plant Medicine Coalition developed and we were talking about the kind of groundwork we wanted to lay in DC, we came up with this idea of creating like community grants and really boosting up those community leaders and organizations that have those networks with the people and can be the messengers for the plant medicine movement, really. So, we have created this community grant program to create hubs. And right now we're focusing on those marginalized areas of the city that, don't have the fresh foods, don't have, easy access to healthcare, that, people that live in poverty and are surrounded by violence on a daily basis. Those most traumatized communities need the healing the most. So we created this program to support hubs in those communities. So people had a place to go to learn about plant medicine. I think that there's a lot of distrust with our healthcare system. And but there's a lot of interest in becoming better and taking their health in their own hands. And there's interest in plant medicine. I think that we're reaching a critical point in this country where something has to change. If things are too inequitable and people are suffering too much, and it's certain people suffering too much. And one way that we are ensuring the social equity is focusing grants on these areas of our city. And we're just in the phase now where people can apply for the grants, and they can do that through our website. And we are funding DC-based organizations that are really out there and educating the community on safety and harm reduction, and doing that work that needs to be done to really inform people about psychedelics and their potential.
Well, that's great to hear, and I just want to echo those comments that a lot of social equity discussions get focused on if we have a regulated system, giving priority for people of color and licensure, and that's great, and I support that. But I think the real work is in reinvesting in communities that have been disproportionately impacted, in record sealing or expungement efforts to erase the legacy of the war on drugs. And so there's a lot of great policy recommendations out there. And since you brought up the local campaign, we had some questions here about, advice for grassroots activists who want to start a decriminalization campaign locally. What advice, this is Kay's question, what advice would you have for people that want to do a local campaign?
Yeah, so start, see if your area has a psychedelic society, and I would start there. I think that a lot of our foot soldiers for our campaign came from the Psychedelic Society. That was like a safe place for people to have these conversations, really. Um, you know, they really understood the nature of medicines and its potential, and they were great messengers for us. Also, our campaign was comprised of a lot of cannabis activists. You know, cannabis is a plant medicine, and there are therapeutic benefits of cannabis, and you know, they really understand this argument as well. I think the best thing that you can do is try to get on your local council member's calendar, and you know, do some research on who your representatives are at the city, county, state level, and you know, have um, have a plan, and have a get on the calendar, have a conversation with your lawmakers, and you know, just talk about it and make it really informal, but just say, you know, I want to talk to you about this movement that is burgeoning all over our country, and shows a lot of promise in treating mental health and potentially beyond. You know, anyone that is looking to start a campaign or looking to really just engage with lawmakers on this, please feel free to reach out to our organization. We do have a local and state office where, you know, we are currently working with a couple of different localities, hopefully in the near future, to help assist people kind of like politically strategize on how to best approach these conversations with our lawmakers. You know, I think that just a little bit of research on who our elected officials are, what they vote for, and who their donors are can tell them a lot. You know, having a conversation with them is just a really good first start to this. You know, so much can be accomplished in an hour's time with a lawmaker. You know, when I initially started Initiative 81, I was like, well, I've worked in DC Council I've worked for DC government for probably close to 10 years. My husband has worked for DC Council. He worked for a council member for 2 terms, and now works on the executive side. I was like, well, this is a shoo-in. I've got friends in government, and, you know, we can get somebody to pass a bill, but, you know, no one wanted to bite on it. And everyone was really afraid of this subject matter here in DC before the campaign started. So, you know, sometimes you have those conversations with people, with lawmakers, and, you know, you walk away and nothing comes of it, but you plant a seed in their mind, and then you let some time pass, and, you know, you inform them with the research, you inform them of the long cultural history, and you start a dialogue with them. And that's all sometimes that it takes to start to influence a lawmaker, is just starting a dialogue and really educating them on this subject matter. And that's could be the start of something happening. I mean, I think Wiener in California, he's has a lot of people talking to him, but, you know, he really wanted to bring this issue forward himself, you know? So, you know, sometimes you can find a champion like that will, you know, have these conversations freely with advocates, and, you know, really be that cheerleader for the movement.
Yeah, I helped work on on behalf of several groups giving input to Senator Wiener's office, and you know, we do appreciate those lawmakers that listen to a lot of voices. He heard from the Indigenous Peyote Conservation Initiative. He heard from activists all across the spectrum, and so definitely appreciate those type of lawmakers. Let's see, another question from Lisa, and we are down to about 4 minutes left, and I have to moderate another panel in 4 minutes. So we're going to have to cut this off, hard stop here. But one last question here. Lisa asks, does the venture capital interest in psychedelics help persuade lawmakers?
Some lawmakers, I'm sure, yeah. I think that with some other lawmakers, it might be alarming. But we'd have to remember that the venture capitalist interest in psychedelics is just one area of psychedelics. if a lot of these companies' intentions are to create the most access for the most people, and that involves working government channels and having clinical trials that are extremely expensive, where venture capital is absolutely necessary to actually conduct this research. I think that it is a part of all this. I think that there's some crazy valuations out there with some of these companies, but I think we're all kind of floating in this space that we've never all been before. Cannabis wasn't in this kind of biotech VC world. It was a much different issue. So the money that's flooding into it could be a lot of hype and excitement, but for lawmakers, I think that it does bring attention to them that there is so much money flowing to this. I think we're all they're in the space of, well, let's wait and see what happens with all this. And that's what lawmakers will do. They'll wait and see. And that's why organizations like Plant Medicine Coalition are really important to, keep bringing up the issues that lawmakers don't necessarily have at the top of their head. So I'm just looking at the time, making sure I don't go over 5. So I think that
we kind of are down to our last minute. I did want to mention I put the Plant Medicine Coalition website in the chat box.
Awesome.
Other ways people can get in touch with you, or I guess just email you through the website?
Yeah, email me through the website, info@plantmedicinecoalition.org. We will try to get to your email as quickly as possible, but please give us some patience. We are a super small org, currently being run by all volunteers, including myself. I am working at my full-time job right now still, and looking to transition to Plant Medicine Coalition full-time later this year. So yeah, if you have a state or locality that you want to start decrim and you want some advice, please email us. If you are an interested person or you have an organization that you'd love to join the coalition, info@plantmedicinecoalition.org. I get all those emails, so it won't go unnoticed.
All right, with that, we're down to 10 or 20 seconds here. So I just want to thank you, Melissa. You did a great job, and you really have done great service to the movement with your work in DC, and we look forward to your continued advocacy with Plant Medicine Coalition. So thank you for being here, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.